Too loud, too soft, too down here? Okay. So, before I became a policy analyst, which sounds like a very, very boring title, I did child abuse investigations. So for several years, that's all I was doing was investigating child abuse. Specialized in what we call as specialized investigations. So I investigated foster homes, daycares, those kind of gamut of investigations. Also did a lot of sex abuse, fatalities, things like that. So kind of range from all different kinds. Today I want to kind of talk to you the mandatory reporting end of it. So I'll probably work with a variety of your all's professions. So if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand or ask your question. Doesn't matter to me, I'm pretty flexible, okay? Oh, that's the pointer. There we go. So, mandatory reporting is so that the state can remain eligible for federal funding. States are required to have procedures in place for reporting and investigations of child abuse and neglect cases. Which created the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act of 1974. In short, that's called CAPTA, which is part of public law, and there's some public law numbers. If you are really gurus about that and really want to know, look it up. But there's a whole gamut of requirements, federal law requirements, that is part of federal funding, and that's where a lot of our federal dollars come from. They can help fund the state in a lot of our programs and things like that. So mandatory reporting, the state law requires that anyone with reasonable suspicion that a child is dependent, abused, or neglected is required to make a report to the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. This is found in KRS 620.030. And to find that, you just Google that. KRS 620.030, and you can find that whole statute right there. KRS states failure to report this is a criminal act, and so that is also found in 620.030. So you can be actually criminally charged for failing to report this. Who are mandated reporters? So the same statute, which is the 620.030, says that no professional client or patient privilege shall be a ground for refusing to report under this section. So mandated reporters include peace officers, medical examiners, child care professionals, health professionals, social workers, coroners, school personnel, dentists, mental health professionals, and just about any organization. There are exceptions: attorney-client privilege and clergy tenant. Okay. There's a lot of words on here. So you're protected. There is some protection under this. So there's good faith immunity that can be found in 620.050. So as long as you make the report in good faith, so as long as you are in good faith, you believe that this child, or an adult, because we also accept adult abuse investigations or reports, adult abuse reports. As long as you believe in good faith that this person, a child, is being abused, neglected, or is dependent, and make that report, you are liable from civil or criminal responsibility. So it says here that person is also claiming immunity from respect of participation in judicial proceedings resulting from such report or action. Confidentiality can also be found under the same KRS 620.050 for those who are really, really interested in looking those up. Is also confidentiality. So it says any identifying information concerning the individual initiating the report shall not be disclosed. So that means when you call our intake, they're going to ask you, do you want to leave your name? But you cannot leave your name. But you can remain anonymous. So you do not have to. We will not disclose your information. There are exceptions we may have to give your information to law enforcement officials with a legitimate interest in the case, to members of a multidisciplinary team as identified in KRS 620.020, and to under a court order. Sometimes courts may order us to give out that information, but that would only be under a court order, and usually it is to court officials such as the judge or under a situation like that. And there's certain situations that conducted an in-camera review of the record of the state related to a report and has found reasonable cause to believe that the reporter knowingly made a false report. So that would be in that situation. The disclosure. So disclosure means a statement from the alleged victim or other individual regarding an occurrence of maltreatment. So if you hear a child or an adult disclose, or you witness an incident of maltreatment firsthand, or if you receive information secondhand, at that moment you are obligated under state law to make a report to the county. Okay? So you need to make a report. You do not need to interview the child or initiate any kind of investigation yourself. And 620040 says any person or other person do not have the authority to conduct internal investigations in lieu of an official investigation outlined in this section.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a school nurse, so the teacher says, I see blah, blah, blah going on with this student. I try to encourage her to make a report because she has seen it, she has heard it, but we are obligated to do it as well if they did not, or automatically we may need to do it.
Right. We get that question a lot because a lot of times there's already protocol set up in maybe your facility or agency of who makes the report. Specifically in schools, it may already be set up to go to your school nurse or your school counselor or your principal. So you need to follow whatever procedure is set up in your.
As long as somebody has done it, it's okay?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. But you need to make sure to follow that because sometimes, there's loopholes.
And if
stuff
it
like
didn't
that.
happen, then we should do it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Just make sure that it's been reported.
I've also been told the more people that report a situation, the more weight is done to that case. If the school nurse, if the teacher, if the principal, and they get multiple reports on a particular child, then that it gets more weight. Is that not true?
No. And we'll talk about that here just a little bit later because I'll explain our acceptance criteria. All of our reports are accepted based on acceptance criteria only. So not the mass number of reports we get, it's based on our acceptance criteria. With that same sense, the more reports we get more information that makes it meet our acceptance criteria. So that may help, because we may get more bits of information as more reporters call in that helps it meet that acceptance criteria. But no, the mass number of reports, no. Okay? Any more about that? Good question, thank you. All right. So please report what you hear or see. Do not try to interpret or paraphrase the child's statements. It's very important for our intake, which is who the person you're calling, that's our intake, to hear exactly what the child is stating, okay? Not what you think they're stating or paraphrasing, things like that. Provide objective information. Now, as nurses in your various fields, it is also important for you all to provide us things that you've also observed and seen in your field. So if you're seeing how the child's reacting to touch, how the child's reacting to the situation, the environment, and things like that, that is very important. So that's things that you're seeing, you're observing, things like that. That is very important information to include. Okay? So what kind of information are we going to ask for? We're going to ask for your identity. It's going to help us. And the reason why we're going to ask, and it's important, people have mixed feelings about this, about leaving their name to not leave their name and things like that. The reason why is because you have multiple points of contact in the case. Okay? So when you pick up the phone, you have a concern about a child, you're talking to the intake person on the other end of the phone. Okay? So the intake person is taking all this information. So the intake person, you hang up the phone with the intake person. The intake person types all this stuff up and hands it off to the investigator. The investigator is the one who's actually going out on the case and is going to make sure this child and his family is safe. Well, if that investigator doesn't have enough information or can't track down the family or needs a little bit more information and they don't have a reporting source's information to contact back, and you may have that tidbit of information they need, it makes it a lot harder for the investigator to track them down. So it does help the investigator out if you do leave your information. Again, we keep your information confidential. That is under law. We're not allowed to disclose that. We've already talked about that when we would have to. So it does help us if you leave your name and your information. But again, you can remain anonymous, and you can refuse to provide your name and your information. We would ask specific information such as the nature and the extent of the abuse, neglect, or dependency. So who, what, when, where, that kind of stuff, okay? The basics. Current location of the child. Where are they now? Where are they going? If you're in a hospital setting or a school setting, when's school dismissed? When's the kid going to be discharged? When are they leaving the facility? When are they leaving the health department? When's their appointment over? Are they going to another appointment after this? That kind of information is going to be really helpful because we're going to talk about initiating time frames. Sometimes the investigator has to be out there within 1 hour. So in that hour, where's the kiddo going? That's really going to be helpful for us, okay? The condition of the child. What do they look like? What kind of condition are they in? It's really going to be helpful. If you have any knowledge of previous child abuse or neglect, if mom makes a statement that says, well, I don't have my other 2 kiddos, it's going to be really important to know. It's going to help us. Or I got in trouble for this in Texas. It's going to be important to know. So sometimes people don't realize that they slip up and make little statements, and that you guys catch that kind of stuff. So that's helpful for us to know too. Any immediate safety issues for the child or the investigator? If they smell like pot, might be helpful for the investigator to know, because that could possibly be an indicator that drug use is going on in the home, and that could be an risk factor for the child and the investigator. Okay. Perpetrator information. That's the person who is alleged to be causing the abuse or neglect or dependency, including the name, relationship to the child, and where are they? So the acceptance criteria, kind of what we were just talking about. So the cabinet may or may not accept the report for investigation. Okay, so when you call in the report, it's got to meet our criteria before we're going to send it to an investigator and send an investigator out on the case. Okay. Acceptance criteria is based on a statutory definition of abuse, neglect, or dependency. And you can look that up yourself. You can just Google KRS 600-020 or in KAR 922 and then 1330. Okay. The cabinet does not have the statutory authority to investigate allegations that are not related to identifiable safety issues. So if it's not a safety issue, it is a value judgment. So value judgments we're not allowed to investigate. It has to be a safety issue. Okay. Kentucky is split it's not literally split, but in the cabinet world, it is split into 9 service regions. In our 9 service regions, we have 9 central intake units. So in each region, there is a central intake unit that are taking calls throughout the state. After hours, after about, I want to say midnight, we have 1. They take calls for across the state. Okay, so they kind of triage the cases out across the state and get them to where they need to go, and then it's split up after that. Okay, so it depends on which area you are in, which area you're working out of, where you need to call. But you need to, all that's available online, and I have some websites available at the end of the slide and also in your packet that can help you decide which area you are in, which region you're in, and that can help you decide which intake unit you need to call. Okay? But there's also the statewide hotline number, and then you can also call that one as well. Okay? Our screening options are, so when you call our centralized intake, they are going to screen the referral. So the information you called in, they're going to screen it, and they're going to say, does it meet acceptance criteria? It does not meet acceptance criteria. We're going to link this family to resources in the community. There's not enough information for this referral to meet, or it's a law enforcement assist. Sometimes the police call and they need a social worker to come out and help, maybe interview a child or assist in assessing the situation. So we may send a social worker out to help in that situation, and we would track those as a law enforcement assist. So what are our categories? Well, we have physical abuse, which is classified as non-accidental physical injury. So that can range from broken bones, skull fractures, bruises, the whole unit. Okay? Burns, all that good stuff. Sexual abuse or exploitation, pretty self-explanatory there. Neglect, and we'll go into this a little bit further. There's various forms of neglect. Neglect in general is failure to provide essential protection, care, supervision, food, clothing, shelter, education, or medical care necessary for the child's well-being considering their age. That's a very, very, very broad area. Okay. Dependency is through no fault of the parent. The child is without essential care or protection. For example, the child's parents, their guardian, has died, so they have no caregiver anymore. Something like that would be in that category. Human trafficking is pretty up and coming, and that's what I do a lot of my work in recently, so I may go on a little bit of a tangent here about that. If you ever have a chance or opportunity to take a human trafficking training, please do. As a healthcare professional, you will have a great opportunity to screen and catch human trafficking cases and victims. So that if you all have an opportunity to take any kind of human trafficking training, I highly, highly recommend it, because you'll have a great opportunity to catch and have the first interaction with human trafficking victims, so especially in our youth. So great opportunity there. In definition, human trafficking is when a child or an adult is forced, but specifically we're talking about children, is forced to perform sexual acts or labor services in exchange for something of value. So for example, drugs, money, or shelter. Human trafficking has to be sex in exchange for like drugs, money, shelter, things like that. In Kentucky, we're seeing it here. We're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing it all the way down, in the rural counties. We're seeing it in, our bigger counties like Lexington and Louisville. So we're seeing it everywhere. And we're not seeing it just in your, in what you'd see the traditional sense of like a pimp, if you will, with a prostitute. Okay, we're seeing it with parents who are exchanging their kids for drugs. Okay, that's human trafficking. All right, so you guys have a really interesting aspect here, because you may be able to catch some of these being healthcare providers, because parents are still taking their kids, thankfully, to the doctor, into their healthcare fields and things like that. Okay, so again, if you have the opportunity to take a human trafficking training, please do. And if you have any questions about that, our email's up there. We do investigate these, and we're investigating non-caretakers. Okay, so normally the cabinet has only ever investigated caretakers. So people who are in the caretaking role, like parents, grandparents, babysitters, things like that, is all the cabinet has ever investigated before. Currently, the cabinet is investigating only in human trafficking cases a non-caretaker. So this is the only criteria where DCBS investigates a report where a non-caretaker is the perpetrator. So for example, the next door neighbor happens to have purchased the child, so gave mom, we'll just use this as an example, gave mom some drugs to have whatever he wants to do with the child. That's a non-caretaker because he wasn't in the sole care, custody, and control of that child. We would investigate him as a perpetrator of human trafficking. Does that make sense? So we would investigate that type of situation. So you all may or may not come in contact with something like that, but we are seeing them locally. We're seeing them in rural counties. We're seeing them in big counties. Statewide, it's a problem. Okay? So take a training. It's pretty interesting. Okay? Neglect. I told you there was a little bit of neglect. Supervision neglect, it's the age of the child, chronological or developmental. It can be related to the time the child was unsupervised, the maturity of the child, the availability of other adults or resources to the child, safety hazards present in the home or the neighborhood. That's all the kind of things we're going to look at when it comes down to supervision of the child.
Can I ask a question about that? I have a lot of parents, I'm a school nurse, say, well, she's 11 years old, she can stay at home by herself. I mean, what do you all look at? What's the criteria for that? Or I left her in the car and somebody knocked on, I've had somebody say, I left my child in the car and somebody knocked on my window and said I shouldn't have done that,
Yeah. Well, the car thing depends on the heat or how cold it is, That's kind of a big taboo thing right now with
leaving kids in the car, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it really depends. There's so many other factors that we have to look at. Every situation is different. And I've had we get calls all the time in Frankfurt, people calling statewide saying, well, what's the law on the age of how old a kid can stay home alone? There isn't one. You can look all day long, there isn't one. To my knowledge. Sometimes we kind of go on the general rule of thumb. Every social worker is different, you'll ask. Sometimes we say 8 and up can stay home alone, 12 and up can babysit. but it depends on all sorts of factors. Where they live, the developmental age of the child, how mature the child is.
The resources and ones
Exactly,
available.
the resources. Does this child know what to do in an emergency situation? Because I don't know about you, but an 8-year-old in an emergency situation, they're going to freak out. They're not going to know what to do.
Right.
You know? So it really just depends on, and is an 8-year-old supervising toddlers? You know, or is an 8-year-old with, is mom 30 minutes down the street?
Well, I had a 12-year-old little girl that babysat, and I felt like I needed to call. It was a 12-year-old that was babysitting like a 5-month-old.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that,
Yeah. And absolutely, and it never hurt, if you're questioning it in your gut and you're like, this isn't really right, call it in. You know, it's better safe than sorry. You know, because you don't know that we keep record of every single call that comes into us. So we have a huge computer system, database that tracks and logs every single call that comes into us. And so the key there is that we may have gotten 3 other calls that same week of a 5-month-old baby screaming for hours on end.
right.
And it could be because that 12-year-old is babysitting and she doesn't know what to do.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it could be that situation, so it doesn't hurt to call. You know? Every situation's different. It's hard to say, is that right or wrong, you know, because we don't know what else is going on. So in that situation, if it's bothering your gut, I would call it in just to cover your butt, you know. That's what I would do. So environmental neglect is a serious health and safety hazard is present. It would include hazardous materials or chemicals, raw sewage, insufficient shelter, a fire safety hazard, infestations of vermin and rodents. Medical neglect, untreated injury, illness, condition, or disability that may interfere with normal functioning and worsen without treatment, become life-threatening, or result in permanent impairment would be a medical neglect situation. Risk of harm, incapacitated caretakers, repeated exposure to domestic violence, or exposure to a sexual offender. Okay. Neglect continues. I told you there's a lot of neglect. Educational. We look at the age of the child. If the school has exhausted all resources, if the caretaker's neglect prevents the child from attending or performing in school settings, situations like that. Okay. Substance use or abuse neglect. The caretaker is under the influence while caring for the child, driving with the child. Their use has affected their ability to parent the child. Food neglect. Dietary needs are not met. The child's health is impacted, such as malnutrition or dehydration. Usually we look at a period of time, so we have to see it over a substantial period of time. We're not talking about 24 hours. They didn't, all they had to eat was Cheerios or something like that. We need to see a little bit longer period of time than that. Okay? Hygiene and clothing. The child's physical health is affected by the caretaker's act or omission. Okay? Emotional injury. Inflicted harm on a child's emotional well-being by non-accidental means. Often this requires a QMHP assessment as a qualified mental health professional. Okay? So before we can make a finding on this one, we do have to have a QMHP to sign off on this. Okay? So what does not meet criteria? So we talked about what does meet our criteria, what does not meet our criteria. DCBS does not accept reports when the situation does not meet the definition of abuse, neglect, or dependency. That would include if the reporting source has generalized feelings of concern regarding the welfare of the child, but does not give specific allegations that would indicate child abuse, neglect, or dependency. The report alleges corporal punishment appropriate to the age of the child without injury, mark, bruise, or substantial risk of harm. So if you call in and say, well, they gave him a whooping, that's the only thing you say, that's not going to meet. So we need to know more. Did they have bruising? Was the whooping across the face? Was the child 2 months old? That would be a little bit different story. Okay. So we need to know as much information around that as possible. Okay. The report concerns child abuse inflicted by a person who is not in a caretaking role, except in those cases of human trafficking. I told you that's a little bit different. Those reports are reported to the local law enforcement agency, the Kentucky State Police, as well as the Commonwealth's Attorney or County Attorney's Office. So they investigate those non-caretakers, except in the cases of human trafficking. So, for example, if it was a situation of just how you say it like this, just plain old sexual abuse with not the human trafficking components. If it was just sexual abuse, say the uncle sexually perpetrated on the child, and he was in a non-caretaker role, he just happened to sexually perpetrate on the child, we would not investigate that. We would forward that to law enforcement and they would investigate that. If it was child-on-child situation, so brother, sister, we'll do the non-stereotypical roles. Sister, older sister, perpetrates on a just a couple year younger sibling. Okay? Cabinet does not investigate that. That's a child-on-child situation. We would send that to law enforcement because that older sibling was not in a caretaking role with the younger sibling. Does that make sense? Okay. You would still report it to us. Does that make sense? You would still report it to us. We would screen it and we would forward it to law enforcement. Okay? So still report those situations to us. It would be our responsibility to screen them and forward them to the appropriate authorities. Okay? How will you know if the report is accepted or not? State law prohibits the cabinet from disclosing any confidential information about a case to anyone except as prescribed by the statute, which would mean the custodial parents, the alleged perpetrators, court personnel, law enforcement, and specific professional providers, including school personnel, with a legitimate interest in the case. Okay? So when you call the central lines intake, they will give you a reference number, and you can call them back with that reference number, and they will tell you if it's been accepted or not. Okay? You usually have to give them maybe a couple hours, because it has to make its way through the system, and they have to staff it with a supervisor and things like that. So give them a couple hours, but they will tell you if it meets acceptance criteria or not. Okay? But we're not going to tell you exactly what's going on in the investigation. That would be breach of confidentiality. Okay? So here's the initiation timeframes I was just talking about a while ago. We are prescribed by 922 KAR to, if the report meets criteria, to get out on a referral within so many hours. Okay? If it's imminent risk, we have 1 hour. What that means is the investigator has 1 hour to make face-to-face contact with that child victim. It can be kind of difficult when we can't find them. So that's why it's really important to give us as much information as you can. Okay? Physical abuse, non-imminent, we have 24 hours to make face-to-face contact with that child. A low-risk report, we have 48 hours to make face-to-face contact with that child. Okay. So how long does the investigation take? It takes 30 working days. Okay? Our policy gives us 30 business days. That doesn't include weekends or holidays, okay, to complete an investigation. Now, granted, there are a few situations where a worker can request an extension from an FSOS, and FSOS just means a supervisor. Okay? So workers can request an extension from their supervisor when there are legitimate delays in the case for completing the investigation. Those delays can be related to law enforcement, placement of the child, obtaining external documents or reports such as a medical examination, forensic assessments, autopsies, psychological assessments, or things like that. Okay? Courtesy interviews from outside of the county, region, or the state. Sometimes we have to get interviews of maybe collaterals or the perpetrator or the child or something like that, other relatives or something that would require another social worker to go out for us. Okay? Or inability to locate the family. Sometimes it takes a long time to find the family because the families move, they're transient, they're running, things like that. Okay? So, are all the children removed? No. We do not remove all the children. However, there are sometimes situations where we do have to remove children. If the children are at immediate risk and with a court order, then we remove the children. We would petition the court and file for an emergency custody of the children. Okay? If the judge orders emergency custody, the child is placed with an approved relative or in a foster care placement. Okay? At the temporary removal hearing, which is at court, that has to be held within 72 hours that the emergency custody order is granted. So after the judge signs that emergency custody, we go pick up the children and place them. Within 72 hours, all of us are in court in front of the judge talking about the case. Okay? Law enforcement, on the other hand, can remove a child for 12 hours without a court order. So our law enforcement can do that. Physicians and hospital administrators can also place a child on a 72-hour hold without a court order. So what are the outcomes of the investigation? What can happen? There can be 3 outcomes, or 3 findings, if you will. We can make a finding of services needed. So we can say if a family is in need of services, and we can open a case, provide some services to the family, or we can provide services during the investigative phase of the case, as we're going, and we can close that case. Okay? It's kind of the least restrictive. Okay? A substantiation means we did find abuse or neglect. Unsubstantiated means we did not find abuse or neglect. Okay? Ongoing and open cases. If the assessment identifies risk that there's needed intervention, the case may move from an investigation mode to an ongoing mode. Okay? The shift from investigation role to assisting the families and parenting the children safely. So it's less of a picking everything apart and finding out who, what, when, where, and all that good stuff to let's put this back together and get this family safely to permanency and getting the cabinet out of real life. Okay? The case may be transferred to another worker, so you may hear, well, I got a new social worker. That's possible because some counties, it depends on where you are, some counties have investigative workers only, some counties have ongoing workers, and some counties have generic workers. It can get really confusing fast. So some counties do have generic workers that do both roles. It just depends on where you are and what the availability is. Okay? Reasonable efforts, a case plan will be completed outlining services to match any needs identified in the assessment. So in the investigation, we're going to identify any high-risk issues or kind of what's going on, what were the surrounding high-risk needs for around abuse or neglect, and then we're going to develop a case plan, which is basically a list of things that the family needs to do to make sure that those kiddos are safe. Okay? We're going to have family team meetings. Okay? So some of you all may hear the families talk about, well, I got a meeting with social workers and things like that. Sometimes they're family team meetings, and at those team meetings, that's where they're going to get their case plan. That may be where they talk about what's going to happen in court. That may be where they talk about visitation and things like that. So one of the lingos that you may hear. And there may be some more additional court dates and ongoing court involvement. You may hear the family have to go to court several times because usually the court dates, there are multiple court involvement, court appointments. Okay? So here's some handy websites and information that you can utilize if you want more information. The top one is the Child Protection Branch, which is where I'm located, and Sarah's located back there. We have an email box. It's our general email box. It's dcbschildprotection@clearwater.gov. If you have questions or concerns, if you have any concerns about an investigation or a work or anything like that, we also manage those. So you can feel free to email us. There's about 4 members on that branch that we answer the box emails. So if you have any questions or case specifics, we can help you answer those as well. Another good resource is the Blue Book. That's what it's called. I don't think it's a blue book, but it's if you print it out, you might be a white book. It was a blue book a long time ago. Okay, I think if you print it, it might just be a white book now. But but it's a lot of good kind of who, what, when, where for families, and kind of answer a lot of questions. It's available online. It's a pretty thick little book, so kind of expect a lot of paper and tree killing if you want to print it. But it does have a lot of good information there that can help you answer some questions from families if they are involved with us. Another good resource, we do have an online reporting system. You don't have to wait on hold. Yay! So for professionals, you all can get on there and you can make a report online. You don't have to wait on hold to the hotline. So you can make this report. It is available during business hours only. Okay? So if it's weekends, if you happen to work in a hospital setting and it's after hours, you're not going to be able to make the report. You do still have to wait on hold. But you can get on our website and you can make a report that way if that's easier for you as well. Just the only, I guess, benefit to talking to a live person versus the website is the live person can prompt you for more information. The website can't do that. So you can only, you're really going to have to rely on your ability to accurately report the information. Okay. Our hotline information is right here, the fourth bullet down. And if you have any complaints, our office of ombudsman. Okay, that is essentially our complaint department. Okay, if any families you work with, that's who they need to call. Because unfortunately, there's always the family that who feels that they have been mistreated, who has not had a good working relationship with their worker. It happens, and that's the number you would need to give them. Okay. All right. Here's our service regions. That's our map. So it's kind of tiny, but it should be in your handout. It's also available online. So you just go to like DCBS, just Google, Kentucky DCBS. But here's our service region. So you'll see little bitty teeny tiny names and the word SRA behind it. SRA stands for Service Region Administrator. That's basically the head honcho in that region. Okay, so if you need anything, you're also available to contact that person as well. Okay. And lastly, any questions? I don't know, did I go fast? Are you guys hungry? Yeah. The website, our business hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30. That would be the website. But the hotline is 24 hours, like all day, every day. Yeah. Yeah. I got this lady back here, sorry.
Does CCBS assist families like help them follow the adoption process if like a family member is into drugs or like a grandparent, as far as adopting the children? Do they assist with that or not?
We could. So I don't know if everybody heard the question. The question was that does DCBS help? And correct me if I'm making sure I'm getting all this right, but does DCBS help families such as grandparents help with getting like the adoption process, say if the parents were on drugs or something like that? We can help talk them through it and point them in the right direction. Are we going to petition the courts on behalf of the grandmother and get custody for her? Probably not, unless there are abuse and neglect situations going that would warrant an investigation. So if it meets acceptance criteria and we had to get involved and remove the children because of abuse or neglect issues, we might file a petition that way. But if there were no abuse or neglect issues going on, Grandma can go do that on her own.
Okay.
Grandma can go petition the courts on her own, and we would encourage her to do that on her
But you
own.
could give them the information, tell them what they need.
Yes, yes. And she can call our branch and I can talk him or her through that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have right here, maybe first, and then I'll come back. Yeah.
Sometimes in the month where I work in the clinic, there's questionable abuse of the caregiver. Let's say a mother came in and she was battered. And then she has young children or infants even. But when you ask her, approach her, is there anything I can do to help you? How did you get the bruises? And she says, I'm fine. No, everything's fine. At that point, you worry about the adults, but also the children, even though there's no visual or any reason to believe there's abuse of those children. I mean, I could have a bruise. I have a bruise right now on my arm, but that doesn't mean that I was abused. And if someone says, where'd you get that bruise? Say, oh, I'm fine. I just, I want to talk about it. Does that go back to your gut feeling again? Basically, if you feel like there's a domestic violence in the home that may affect those children, or that another may need help. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I think it would go back to that gut feeling because you may not know that the police were out there the other night and they may be sending in what's called a JC3. JC3 is the police's DCBS report. So the police, sometimes it takes a few days for their report to trickle into us. So they may be sending one over too because they came out and saw a situation. So to kind of go along her question there, no, the number of reports don't matter, but if the police were out there and saw the situation, and then a medical provider saw this situation, those together helps us piece this together that, yes, there's likely does that make sense? There's likely so we use the bits and pieces of information to to help put a picture together of what is going on. So the more information we get helps the intake person be able to make the correct assessment and ensure that we're making the right acceptance criteria.
Thank you, that's a discussion that we have a lot in the clinic. Some people feel we should call, some people feel we shouldn't call. And then people are concerned, I was a school nurse before I was in the clinic, so I always feel led to call, I have that feeling. But some feel like, that person wouldn't come back to our clinic if we call, but basically us calling wouldn't meet that criteria. I'm just clarifying, I'm gonna take this back to the staff. If we didn't meet that criteria by the call, it's over and done, with, but at least we've made that call.
Right. Correct.
And is that pretty much how you guys would want us to present that to our staff?
And by all means, follow your whatever policy
Right.
you all have already set in place. That's the ultimate message too. But as mandatory reporters, if you suspect, then you to make that call. So if it doesn't meet our criteria, it doesn't go anywhere else. We don't do anything else with that. Okay. So I have one back here first.
Can I ask one more real quick?
Yeah.
Sexual activity of minors.
Okay.
And you have 12-year-olds that come in and say they're sexually active. Well, some of us may see that as neglect. Is there a cutoff? Because we know young people are becoming sexually active at younger ages. So is there any guidance you can give on when is, and if it's required to call if someone is 11, 12 years old and coming to do birth control? And you're thinking, they're in 5th or 6th grade and want birth control? I would just like to hear what you say about that.
So the question is there a cutoff on the age of 11 to 12-year-old coming in wanting birth control? And is that neglect of the parents? I don't think we have any sort of statute or any kind of law that says what age a minor can start having sex. It becomes then, is this a question of supervision and how old the sexual partner is for that child? Is the sexual partner for this child the same age child? Is the sexual partner for this child a 38-year-old?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So those are kind of questions.
Let's say it's your 12-year-olds.
Okay.
I would want to call, but some may not. So I guess I'm just looking for some guidance there. Because to me, a 12-year-old having sex, it's my judgment right now saying, well, I don't think a 12-year-old needs to be having sex.
Right.
But whether it's a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old or, an adult, obviously an adult. But
Right.
it's just difficult sometimes because you're glad they came and you want them to have the protection they need if they're going to be sexually active. But again, it's kind of a gray area on when we would call for considered, an abusive issue or a neglect issue.
And just to throw it in, that's why I say it's important that you develop a relationship with your local DCPS office, because when you have a question, they're your resource. It's like, I have a feeling, this is what I've seen, and they can say, well, it's not really a report, or it is, or we'll check it out.
Maybe there's looking for maybe a law or a statute that says,
The statute is you report.
Yeah. I agree.
In the adolescent talk that's coming next, we're going to touch on reporting sex.
Great.
okay,
That's all. Thinking about it, I think I would go ahead and call it in. Each situation is different. So I would go ahead and call it in, and then we could process through what all else is going on. Are the parents just saying, whatever he or she can just do whatever they want? Is there a history of, sexually transmitted, I forget the terminology, diseases or infections, things like that. So we can process through that, okay? Over here.
I was just curious how you help your caseworkers. I would imagine you guys see some incredible stuff. What do you do for your own workers to not be burnt out or bitter, or do you have special programs?
That is the million-dollar question. So the question is, how do you help your workers with burnout, not getting overwhelmed, and dealing with the type of cases we see and stuff like that. And of course, that is the million-dollar question. Of course, you all have seen the, media, and you probably have social worker friends who are just like, woo, we're tired, we're overworked, we're tired. And it's everywhere. We have employee assistance programs. KEEP is our employee assistance program that anybody can call. I'm sure you all have programs like that as well that you can call for, access to services and things. We have a great, support, amongst ourselves that we could talk and, help one another out and things like that. That's something we just help each other out, to be able to, manage the caseload and the types of cases that we deal with and things like that. So it's really about being able to, help yourself and recognize when you're becoming to that level of burnout, and I need a break and things like that. So yeah. Is there any other questions that I missed the hands? Thank you all so much. I know it's hard to pay attention at this hour when you're hungry.
Thank you, Cassie.